Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 7th of November 2023. Time moves on inexorably forward, each day getting closer and closer to, I don't know, Christmas, something else, New Year, my birthday, next September, who knows. Anyway, what has been going on in Ukraine? Well, let's go to where we normally start. The Ukrainian general staff figures for the day before, the Russian losses. All the caveats apply to this, of course. Check out the caveats in the description to the video below. 890 personnel is still a high number at the upper end of the range that we have seen since the beginning of the counteroffensive, although we have seen lower numbers of mechanized equipment lost in the last 3 to 4 days. 5 tanks, 16 APVs and 21 artillery systems is a slight uptick in some of those categories, APVs and artillery, and 2 multiple launch rocket systems is a couple more than yesterday. There were none yesterday, if I remember correctly. So what does that tell us? I think there are still heavy personnel losses there, representative of activity going on in a number of places. We know that Krinky and Pidstepny area, Pishchenivka along the Dnipro River is pretty hot at the moment. Obviously, Avdiivka is still going. Bakhmut is still very active. Stuff happening up in Kupiansk area as well. Although it's quietened down in Robotyne and Velika Novosilka, there is still activity there, and we've heard of things taking place in Vuhledar and Mikilska. So actually, right along the front, there's enough going on to result in heavy personnel losses. And although the vehicle losses aren't as high as we have seen, which was as a result of the huge attacks in Avdiivka particularly, there are still things taking place. Artillery, 21 pieces of artillery lost in the day is obviously going to hurt. 3 drones, not a lot of drone activity last night. 23 vehicles and fuel tanks lost. That is ticking right back up to have an effect, one would think, on Russian logistics, and 2 pieces of special equipment. Well, what other stuff can we find out to support those claims, and what can we find out about the Ukrainian losses? Well, Andrew Perpetua has totted up as a map of what he sees on the socials on a daily basis, and as you can see today, one of those days of parity where the Ukrainians have lost as much as the Russians. And again, when you see this, the question is, well, what's going on? Now, we know that Ukrainians are attacking along the Dnipro River, although they are, we have heard last night, I did a breaking news piece on the fact that at least one piece of kit has got across the river. There are lots of rumors flying around as to the flow of equipment across the river or not. But this would suggest that there is equipment around the river, and this could be easy pickings perhaps for Russian artillery and drones, although there's a lot of electronic warfare going on along the river. So is this lost along the river? I don't know. There are also, there's also activity going on in all the places I've mentioned previously, and some of those places the Ukrainians are going to be attacking as well. So what do we have here? Well, a radio relay piece of equipment, and then we have a boat there, and down to IFVs, which normally suggests some kind of attacking maneuver, and a couple of APCs and mine-resistant ambush protection truck, as well as some civilian logistics vehicles and whatnot. So a bit of a mix. No tanks. Oh, there is a tank, an unknown tank there, destroyed, but no really significant equipment. But again, I think that indicates that maybe the Ukrainians are attacking a number of places. And for the Russians, we have, that ship pretty much, eradicates anything else on the list in as far as value is concerned. We also have electronic warfare station taken out, a couple of bits of artillery, 3 tanks there, and some IFVs indicating that the Russians are still probably attacking in certain places. And actually, we have seen some footage to suggest that is still taking place. So, for example, this bit of footage has done the rounds. I can't really show it to you, but it's some pretty impressive footage of a lot of Ukrainian vehicles in a column getting taken out. Not all of them. I mean, some of them got away, but they seem to do this thing where, and you can follow them because it's a frosty field, and they make these clear tracks where, so it's very, somebody's saying that when I showed a bit of footage that was like this recently, they're like, oh, that's computer game footage. No, it's not. It's pretty genuine. And these guys seem to be going around in this circle and then firing into the tree line here. Almost seems to be a massive attack on the tree line, but with overloading of the vehicles. And then these vehicles kind of get hit here. There's cluster munitions used. There's other artillery ammunition just slamming into some of those vehicles. And there's quite a few dead bodies around one of the vehicles a bit later. And it doesn't end well for the Russians. I don't know what proportion of the vehicles were taken out, but there's a good deal of them there that are lost. So there are still attacks taking place. I presume that one, although it looks similar to other footage, is a new bit of footage that was either from yesterday or the day before. Now, talking about losses, Army of Drones, United 24, huge fundraising that has procured an awful lot of drones for the Ukrainians, has hit a record 335 Russian strongpoints in 1 week. In addition, Ukrainian drone operators using drones from the Army of Drones project destroyed 83 Russian armored combat vehicles, 72 trucks, 36 tanks, and 317 Russian personnel were counted as taken out. So, just to support the idea that drones are, I guess, the main weapon to, it's almost like it's replacing artillery. And in fact, it's quite interesting listening to a Ukrainian journalist for, I think, writing for Occupy Democrats of all people, which is a real leftist organization in America, but she's a Ukrainian journalist in Kyiv. There was interviewed by the Daily Telegraph's Ukraine, the latest podcast yesterday, about drones and how they're being used. And there is this acceptance with many that they're basically, in a lot of places, they're replacing artillery. They're basically functionally doing the same as artillery. And if, for the Ukrainians, it's like, we need to use what we can get. We can get quite a lot of drones at the moment still, and we can get where we're running out of artillery, and there needs to be this, lag as there is a ramping up of production of artillery ammunition. Something needs to fill that gap. She's also talking about how Ukrainian-made drones that are cheaper, and they don't need to be expensive. So it's like some of the Chinese drones are cheaper and cheerful as well. But there are different levels of drones, and you can get, really all singing, all dancing drones. But for a lot of many of the functions that are necessary for the Ukrainians, they don't need crazy expensive drones. And so, they are starting to prefer some of their own indigenously made drones as their own production facilities are ramping up capacity for drone manufacture. Right. This is an example of a drone that doesn't work. This is a Russian drone. And as Andrew Perpetua there says, he lolzed. This is something that happens. I mean, there's a bouncing drone. It doesn't look like the biggest drone, but it doesn't quite work there. Nonetheless, that bit of kit was taken out eventually. I think he says, I don't know, I thought he replied to that. I think he replied to that somewhere else, saying that eventually it was blown up, and it did take 5 or 6 drones, though, to do so. I don't know where that is, unless he's deleted that. Odd. That was there last night, but nonetheless, that's the sort of thing that you do see. The drones don't always blow up or don't always take out their targets, and there are varying claims as to the success rate of drones. Now, talking about losses, I guess this is the implication that there are heavy equipment losses here for the Russians. This is a group of, as they say here, Moscow boys, Russians from the 70th Regiment, vowing to fight until the bitter end. This is, I believe, in the Robotina area, as is mentioned there. This is interesting for a number of reasons. One, it's a case that, we've got not a lot here. We're really struggling for equipment. but actually their desire and their loyalty has not been affected. These guys are like, yeah, we're going to fight to the bitter end, against those Ukrainians. So they say Ukrainian nationalists are pushing us with equipment, drones, new weapons, they say. Our group lacks mobility, elementary, just fast wheels. He said, because the war is going on now, we just don't have time to maneuver somewhere. For 80 people, we only have one BTR left. So this is the main point of this, me showing you this video, is that they are struggling for equipment. And then when you go back and look at the equipment losses, okay, not necessarily in Robotina, we've seen a lot in Avdiivka, but there are huge losses that arguably are unsustainable. So they say, we hope for your support. We don't give up with your support. We will stand to the end. We hope that we will crush them. We need fully fledged equipment, preferably pickups, drones with thermal vision. So this is a real indication of what they need and therefore what they're lacking. This will save our lives, our fighters. In turn, we promise to stand to the end and not give up. Victory will be ours, says these Russian soldiers. Then when you go back to look at, well, why are they lacking in pickups? And then you see, on a daily basis, this is actually a very low number compared to what we have seen. We have seen days where there's been from Andrew Perpetua, visual confirmation of a dozen of such vehicles. And then when you look at what the General Staff are claiming, 23 vehicles and fuel tanks taken out, of which many will be pickup trucks and similar. So that's what they're lacking, because I presume there's just a huge attrition. And somewhere like Robotina, where there is fierce fighting it's right on the front line, you can bet your bottom dollar that Ukrainian and Russian drone operators will be, seeking to take out every bit of equipment that moves. And this is why so much of the work is done on foot. Right, moving on to another sort of loss here. Zaluzhny, the head basically of the Ukrainian war effort, has had his aide killed in an explosion at his home near Kiev. This has really caused a lot of consternation and has hit the news. Major Hennady Chastyakov, an assistant of Ukraine's commander-in-chief Valery Zaluzhny, was killed by an explosive device in his home, Zaluzhny announced on the 6th yesterday. The officer was killed on his birthday by explosives present in one of the gifts. So we saw this with a Russian mill blogger in St. Petersburg when he received a statuette and it blew up. This might be similar. There are varying rumors going around. So Ukraine's top general wrote on his Telegram channel, the reasons and circumstances of the officer's death are to be established in a pre-trial investigation. He added, Chastykov's wife reportedly said that her husband was killed by a grenade contained in a gift bag with alcohol he brought home. Ukrainska Pravda reported, citing sources in law enforcement. Then, Zaluzhny's assistant, Gennady Chastyakov, was killed by a grenade. Zaluzhny himself said, from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Gennady was a reliable shoulder for me, completely devoting his life to the armed forces of Ukraine and the fight against Russian aggression. So I think he was a good friend of Zaluzhny as well as his kind of aide. And that will obviously be a sore loss for Zaluzhny and for the Ukrainian war effort. The police have come out and said that he probably died in an accident. I'd say this is probably a bit of PR work, fighting the PR fire here. There is no reason yet to talk about a Russian trace. Quote, with a 99.9% probability, this is a tragic incident. He was given live grenades for his birthday, one of which was detonated due to a careless handling, law enforcement agencies noted. I don't know. That sounds a bit dubious, but maybe that is what's happened. The mainstream media here reporting that a close advisor to the commander-in-chief has been killed after a grenade amongst his birthday presents exploded. But doesn't really add too much we don't already know from those other sources. His death was initially reported as a suspected assassination using a booby-trapped gift. Until further details emerged, Ukraine's Interior Minister Klimenko released a statement saying he had been showing his son a box with grenades inside that he had received as a gift. I mean, if that really is what's happened, gee whiz, what an absolute waste. At first, the son took the munition in his hands and began to turn the ring. Then the serviceman took the grenade away from the child and pulled the ring, causing a tragic explosion. Klimenko said police had identified a fellow soldier who gave the gift, said Klemenko, and seized 2 similar grenades. Ukrainian police said the 13-year-old son was also seriously injured. His wife is saying that grenade was in a gift bag her husband brought home. So, goodness me, well, I hadn't actually read past this. I've read the initial bit, but I hadn't actually read this second part. Wow, so it might not just be an effort of doing some PR, firefighting here. It could actually be a really tragic incident. I mean, you're in the armed forces, who gives grenades? Why would you give a grenade? Like, I've seen grenades. That's like me going, my mate at the working at the garage, and thinking, "Oh, you work at a garage? Look, I've got your box of jump leads for your birthday." Yeah, I see them every day, thanks. Oh, what a waste! Absolute waste. What a shame, and poor little son. Goodness me, horrible. Okay, so I don't know what the fallout for that will be, but that's going to be it's when someone like this dies, it's the amount of knowledge they have that you can't replace. You can't just go, oh, that person's died, let's get this person and replace him in a job. That the amount of knowledge they'd have to gain, the working relationships, the links, the know-how, that takes years and years to generate. Anyway. In Buryatia, an incendiary party at the Gvodz shopping centre celebrating 10,000 square metres per Russian sources. And that is a big fire. In fact, it's so big, you can see it from the air very, very clearly there. So another example of Russia on fire there, this time in Buryatia. Okay, moving on to distant strikes. And not a huge amount to talk about, although there is one big subject, which is the Askold, the ship that was hit in the Kerch shipbuilding yard, and it doesn't look like it's in a good condition. That is a ship that I don't think is going to be floating again, going to be at work again. Boulder Counts was hit by 3 missiles. And we'll have a look at one of those striking. It's just interesting when people like Scotson's Aidan, who is like a pro-Russian source on here, showing the satellite images that came out that were cool, couldn't quite work out what's going on, but it looked like there was burn marks. It's like, yeah, no, all these rumours, there's nothing wrong with the ship. And then literally just after he makes those claims, those big kind of like propagandist claims, like these images came out, so nothing wrong, is there? Yeah, I think you need to do one, mate. So one of the biggest bits of video footage coming out is this one, which shows what appears to be, people are saying it's a Scalp, the French version of the cruise missile that hit here, and it just comes down here on the left hand side. You can see it come down there, and then big old explosions. So it's, pretty direct hit going on there. Let's just have it. That's the missile there in transit. So, comes down, and that boat, I don't think, is going to be sailing again anytime soon. So that is one big old high value target that has been taken out in situ. And one would hope that this is the sort of thing they can continue doing. I don't know how easy it is to hit other ships on the Crimean Peninsula, whether they have moved all of them out to Novorossiysk, or whether there are still military targets to hit, naval targets to hit inside the port of Sevastopol, for example, or other ports around Crimea. According to preliminary information, there's a smoking accident at the Taganrog airport, powerful explosions and smoke. Well, this is interesting because this is inside Russia. Just if you carry on driving eastwards through Mariupol and come out of Donetsk into Russia, you get Taganrog and then Rostov-on-Don. So it's just sort of on the edge of the Sea of Azov. Here we have something smoking. So whether this is as a result of indigenous missiles or drones, I don't know. It's less likely to be Western supply cruise missiles or ATACMS or anything like that, due to the kind of geofencing, not technical geofencing, but you know, the requirement they don't hit Russian targets within Russia. Explosion was heard, so that's Taganrog. Lots of claims to do with what's going on there. Don't know what was hit, but something might come out in the next couple of days. And the same concerning Crimea, where I think Belbek Air Base has been hit, or there were sounds near there, and it could be Saki, Novofedorivka as well. So varying claims about explosions on Crimea, Belbek Airfield, Novofedorivka there in the middle of the night. So Ukrainians have been very busy every night now for the last week. And I've been saying to you that this is exactly what they need to do. As the counteroffensive grinds to a halt, they need to be just hammering the Russian targets behind the front lines with all sorts of missiles and drones and all of their new tech that they are developing and mass producing. We're hearing about Shahed equivalent drones with 1,000-kilometer range. They just need to be flooding the airspace with this stuff, because when they do that, not only do they take out high-value targets and really degrade the Russian capability, but they're not losing their own troops in so doing. It's a really good, I talked before about all the different metrics for success. You have different goals. The overall goal is get your territory back, but how do you do that? Then you go down to these sub-goals and sub-goals. And one of those kind of sub-goals or sub-objectives will be not lose troops. So if you can, and another objective be degrade logistics and attrit Russian equipment, and etc., etc. If you have all these goals, and then one of those goals is not lose your own troops, then this is how you do it. You send missiles. You just sit back. No one needs to move. You don't need to run at trenches. We're going to send a load of missiles. This is why you need to destroy those trenches with distance munitions first. Now, if artillery can't do it, and you can't really do it from the air with like A-10s dropping huge amounts of bombs, I don't know. You're going to have to start producing, my opinion would be like things like HIMARS to take out places like Verbove. And instead of having to overrun it with your infantry and mechanized equipment and that just getting knackered, you need to just flatten the place somehow. It might be an expensive way of doing it, using HIMARS and whatnot, but goodness me, rather that than lose 1,000 troops. Okay, so we're going to go on to again mention what's taken place in Krinky, and I did that breaking news piece. So just to remind you that there was at least one BTR shipped across with potentially a PTS-2 amphibious vehicle, so transport vehicle. So there appears to be a more sizable maneuver taking place in the Krinky area on the Dnipro River. There was some doom posting saying the Russians saying, look, the 5 people that recorded this video, there's only two of the 5 who recorded this video are no longer alive, and we've just got our Kalashnikovs as sabers. So basically, yeah, it's not going well for the Russians there, according to some of the Russians. Also, as I said on my breaking news piece, there's some evidence that the Ukrainians are using electronic warfare effectively, and they're using boats to do it. So where they had brought across to the Antonivsky Bridge previously an electronic warfare station, it got taken out with an Iskander missile. Well, if you put them on a boat and whiz them up and down a river, they'll have the same effect, but they're not stationary and they can't be hit by ballistic missiles. The only thing that can hit them really are first-person view drones, which are the very things that those electronic warfare pods will take out the sky. The very thing that can hit these boats is the very thing that won't work around them. That's going to be very useful. The Ukrainians, as they're doing this maneuver, whatever they're doing across the river, they will need to make sure that the Russians are unable to use their drones effectively in the area. And it seems that they are doing that in conjunction with moving equipment across and attacking. So this is really significant, possibly a couple of days ahead with regard to what's going on there. As Dimitri from War Translator says, while the Western magazines are competing in doom posting, Ukrainians continue stretching Russian defences and striking their targets. Just a week ago, Ukrainians were still trying to get a foothold in Krinky, a settlement of a slightly unusual shape. Today, they are already infiltrating out of the area. And this is a post saying, Kherson direction, the fighting in Krinky continues. The enemy is trying to break through to a forest, this is a Russian post, area near the settlement and across the bridge to Melitopol from the Antonivsky Bridge. The map clearly shows both the forest area and the highway. There is a direct connection with the Zaporizhia direction. Everything in the compartment can allow enemy forces to cut off supplies and enter Crimea. So this is quite serious stuff from the Russians saying, well, look, they're looking at severing our logistics routes, and they're also looking to be able to march on to Crimea. Now, don't get ahead of yourself, guys. There's a long way to Crimea and a lot of trenches and mines and Russian equipment. So I don't think it's as easy as that. But the alarm bells are ringing for the Russians there. But as we've seen before, it's so slow to advance in this war, because as soon as you start moving, the enemy piles in resources and drones, and this is where electronic warfare is going to be important, but pile in drones, and then you can't move for threat of being either spotted for artillery or hit with FPV or IED dropping drones. Right, moving on to a very different subject in one sense. So Russia's war damages over 20% of Ukraine's nature reserves, according to a Ukrainian ministry. Ukraine's nature reserves face widespread destruction, with 812 sites across 900,000 hectares reported damage as a result of hostilities. There was another report out recently, or an update of the amount of money to the environmental cost that this war has brought about, and it is just staggering. I mean, you can talk about the human costs, you can talk about all sorts of different ways that this war has debilitated Ukraine, but one of them really significantly is the environmental disaster. And you can talk about the Novokakhovka dam being blown up and all of the issues that brought about. You can talk about heavy metals being left in fields. You can talk about mines, anti-personnel and anti-tank mines. You can talk about thousands of dolphins dying in the Black Sea, all hundreds of thousands of fish washing up, explosions or pollution caused from the war, so on and so forth. There's just so many ways that this war has affected the environment, and it's absolutely is heartbreaking, as well as the human cost as well, of course. Now, going into other bits and pieces to do with Russia, Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs in Dagestan. So Dagestan was where at Makhachkala airport, there was the hysterical groups of basically anti-Semites looking for Jews to lynch, these huge lynch mobs that went around that airport. Well, that obviously didn't look too good for Dagestan, and now the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs has been detained, as according to the Kremlin. So, making that what you will, things are going well in Russia, I guess. Things are going better for Russia in a sense. Is interesting conversation or discussion on Ukraine latest about how I talked yesterday how Putin has gone to Kazakhstan, and there was this idea previously that actually Putin was remaining inside Russia, not really doing anything, partly because of the ICC, International Criminal Court, arrest warrants, so he couldn't go to South Africa, couldn't do this, but actually the war wasn't going well. And when the war isn't going well for you, you don't want to project yourself, go out and say, hey, look at me, everything's fine. The idea he's gone to Kazakhstan not only is going to be in response to the West having gone to Kazakhstan, like Emmanuel Macron was there, and China are hovering like vultures, so on and so forth. So there's a kind of need for him to reestablish influence and power in the area. But also, it could be a sense that he feels the war is going better. The counteroffensive has kind of come to an end, and Ukraine didn't achieve its goals of getting to Tokmak, let alone getting to the Sea of Azov. So he could feel a bit buoyed by that, a bit bullish, and think, hey, yeah, it's going well, so I'm much more likely to be able to go to another country, and they would be more impressed, or I would have this air of a more powerful leader than otherwise would have been the case. So there could be that element that needs to be evaluated. So another thing here that's interesting to note, negotiations are reportedly taking place to hand over Wagner Group mineral assets in Syria and Africa to senior Russian Ministry of Defense officials in exchange for resolving Wagner's debts and issuing veterans certificates to Wagner fighters. So Wagner, somebody owes Wagner fighters and families a lot of money. You know, people have died, people are injured, they've got hospital bills, and the whole Prigozhin Wagner MOD thing has ended with Wagner being basically ostracized. But then Russia really need the troops, and they need what Wagner were doing in Africa and other places around the world to financially support them, and also for reasons of influence and power. So there needs to be some kind of arrangement. Here, it looks like the Russian MOD are going around Africa, tying up loose ends with Wagner's business entities there. Telegram channel reports that Yevgeny Prigozhin's heir, Pavel, who's 25, is negotiating with Russian Deputy Defense Minister Timur Ivanov via an intermediary. The intermediary is said to be one of the participants in a meeting with Prigozhin Sr. at the headquarters of Southern Military District of the Russian Armed Forces during the June 2023 mutiny, likely meaning either Yunusbek Yevkurov or Vladimir Alexeyev. Yevkurov is another Deputy Minister of Defense, while Vladimir Alexeyev is the first Deputy Head of the Main Director at the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, the GRU, with which Wagner has close ties. According to a source, Ivanov is demanding that Pavel Prigozhin hand over Wagner-controlled Syrian oil and gas fields and Central African Republic diamond mines in exchange for the issuance of combat veteran certificates and payments to resolve Wagner's financial problems. The attraction of this deal, which Ivanov is said to have personally confirmed, is that it would significantly increase Prigozhin Jr.'s authority among Wagner fighters who have been complaining for months about the way they have been treated. Veteran certificates are particularly important. Despite prior commitments from the Russian government, many Wagnerites have not received them from the Russian MOD, denying their families access to important social benefits. It's unclear who the ultimate beneficiary of the deal will be. The Telegram channel comments that, at a minimum, this is a Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, whose corruption has become notorious in Russia. Okay, the other thing to note here is that Ukraine, and I meant to show you some footage, I don't know, weeks ago, and sometimes things get lost when I copy and paste them to sticky notes, and then I don't know, they somehow get lost. And it was only when I saw the footage again last night, I was like, oh, I meant to show that weeks ago. So there was claims of Ukrainian fighters taking out Wagner mercenaries in Africa and footage of it. And you're like, and I did tell you about this once previously. It's like, oh, the Ukrainian fighters are fighting. You know, is that a good use of their resources? Well, they have definitely been doing that and taken out Wagner there. And I guess it's still this battle against Russia. And you need to, I guess, if Russia have these income sources to support monetarily the war project in Russia, then it's in Ukraine's best interest to go to the source of those, like the diamond mines and the oil fields or whatever, and take out Wagner fighters there and mess around with the way that this money gets up to there, because that money is then being used to prosecute a war against Ukraine. So you might argue that's a waste of time, Ukrainian soldiers being over there, but Ukraine aren't going to be in a business to go, oh, do you know what would be a good idea? Let's send our soldiers to Africa. They're not going to be like doing that unless it's in their best interest to do so. So there will be value in that activity. Far be it from us to make some kind of value judgment that it's not in their best interest. If they are taking soldiers out of being used in Ukraine, sending to Africa to do things in Africa, it will be in their best interest. So it's interesting that. Now, finally, Zelensky has said it's not the right time to talk elections. So yesterday I reported that some people were saying that there were going to be elections in March the 31st. It's a bit of a leak. Wasn't, but I did say it's not been an official announcement. Well, now Zelensky has rejected the idea of elections, labelling the topic as irresponsible in his video address posted yesterday. Quote, "We must realise that now is a time of defence, a time of the battle that determines the fate of the state and the people, not the time of manipulations, which only Russia expects from Ukraine. Millions of Ukrainian citizens are displaced abroad. Holding an election would be nearly impossible. The money is better spent in protecting Ukraine and making sure they have another election to run," quotes this other source, not the Kyiv Independent. And that's pretty much what I agree with. So my opinion, for what it's worth, is that there are arguments for an election and there are arguments against an election. You can put together some fairly decent arguments going both ways, but actually I think the much better arguments support not having one. Like this will only support Russia, really. I think, yes, you can get continued like democratic validations, so you can put down these people who are claiming Ukraine's not democratic. There are some people saying that it is democratic, and actually the constitution is, although there are interesting different interpretations of the constitution with regards to a presidential election, but whether you've got martial law, you've got a situation where money and political time and effort are better spent on defending Ukraine against a Russian aggression. And I think an election would be problematically distracting for Ukraine. But there are arguments going the other way as well. That's not to say there aren't. But on balance, my opinion would be that, yeah, I can see not wanting to hold an election. Let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you so much for watching it. That was a fairly long one. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate that. I don't really care about this, but I have mentioned it a number of times, so I must care. I just looking at my channel subscribers, and it does crawl along at a couple more today, a couple more. I look at some other channels, and they're like 8 gazillion subscribers, and like, YouTube hates me. I'm sure the algorithm hates me. Anyway, so if you can like, subscribe, share, that's basically what I'm saying. Please do. Take care. Speak soon.